Hi everyone, I hope you'll excuse me for the setting. I am in bed, but I don't want to go back to this later because I'll be busy today. This is an important one. I want to cover it whilst I've come across it. Browsing the internet as one does, I came across a story that caught my attention because it involves a case that happened literally about 10 minutes from where I live in Sunderland city centre. Um, and I think exemplifies the detachment of the legal establishment from public sentiment and also from how many victims feel. So this case involves a young man who suffered an unprovoked attack that destroyed his career prospects, and the thug responsible has been given a suspended sentence, which is not really a punishment in the context of the crime that was committed. Now, the Sentencing Council, which I believe is institutionally soft on crime, despite what they might claim, they arrogantly, they're very defensive. They're very they have an entire section on the website talking about sentencing myths. But it's kind of like, it's based on perspective and opinions rather than what many would consider to be empirical reality. For example, they say that it's a myth that a suspended sentence means the defendant walks free from jail, but that literally is the case if they aren't going to prison. Yes, there's certain restrictions attached. Yes, if they breach that suspended sentence, they could go to prison, but it is by definition walking free because they're not in jail. So I don't know how the Sentencing Council can arrogantly claim otherwise. They're self-interested. They want to protect themselves. But I'm not really. I don't have much faith in them at all. They talk about public consultation, but that's not in every case. It's not every type of crime, and I'm not sure how much they really act on. Sentencing remains massively detached from what much of the public would like to see. And I don't think the British public, I will say this right now, I don't think the British public are bloodthirsty or vengeful or, seeking a situation of, flog him and throw away the keys. I really don't think it's like that. I think people just expect proportionate justice, and we don't have it in this country. I'm so tired of repeating myself, quite honestly, and yet I feel I have to because it's such an important issue. Um, I'm just so disgusted by the justice establishment and their arrogant detachment. So I'm going to read out the case. It's not too long, so bear with me. I'll also put a link to the Sentencing Council's own website and the section where they talk about the penalties one can expect if they breach a suspended sentence. But that's only if they breach it. Um, if you violently assault someone, as long as you're a good boy and you don't do it again, then you will not go to prison. I think that's wrong. I mean, as we see from this case, even if you've done it previously, you can expect to not go to prison. That's why when Lord Timpson claimed we punish too many people in this country, it doesn't correspond with reality because we see so many cases where there's a suspended sentence. So yes, people do escape proportionate punishment. So I'll put a link to that explanation as to how that's managed. But I don't think I basically to put it simply, I think suspended sentences are massively overused. I think there's too many thugs get away with justice, frankly. Okay, so I'll just read this out. A teenager's dream of becoming a firefighter was destroyed when he was repeatedly punched in an unprovoked attack, a court has heard. The 18-year-old suffered major eye issues, including a detached retina, when he was attacked by Liam Appleton in Sunderland city centre on the 1st of July 2023, Newcastle Crown Court heard. Appleton, 21, and from Shildon, that's in County Durham, punched the victim, who had no chance to defend himself, 10 times in the head and face, the court heard. He admitted inflicting grievous bodily harm and was jailed for 21 months, suspended for 2 years, with a judge saying he should be utterly ashamed. Now, I'm interjecting here. Jailed for 21 months, suspended for 2 years, it's an oxymoron. It's dishonest. It's like saying a life sentence that in this country is not a life sentence unless it's a whole life tariff. Jailed for 21 months, suspended for 2 years. A suspended sentence means he's not jailed, so be honest about it. The terminology needs to change. The teenager was talking to a woman in a bar in Sunderland when he noticed the defendant and another man staring at him. Prosecutor Nicoletta Alistari said. The victim and his friend moved to another bar, Gatsby, where Appleton aggressively approached him and asked the teenager to go outside, the court heard. This sounds like the assailant was actually following the victim. Having never been in a fight before and knowing he had done nothing wrong, the young man went outside with Appleton, where he was attacked entirely unprovoked, the court heard. He suffered a severe injury to his eye, which required multiple operations to treat, Miss Alistari said. In a statement read to the court, the victim said his dreams of becoming a firefighter had been taken from him. His firefighters need good eyesight, and he was no longer that happy, confident person who fought the best of everyone. He said he had lost what should have been the best days of his young adult life, and he had been punished while his attacker got to carry on with his life. Appleton of Spruce Court claimed he could not remember what he did, but recorder Toby Hedworth KC gave that short shrift. I do not accept someone who behaved in that way had no recollection of what went on, the judge said, adding the violence had been quite gratuitous against a young man who was completely blameless and had no chance to defend himself. Recorder Hedworth said Appleton, who had a previous conviction for a fray, I'll read that again, a previous conviction for a fray, so we're not talking about a moment's madness here of someone who was never violent, this was a thug with a previous record, should be utterly ashamed of himself. But the judge said he feared jailing Appleton would cause him to be more violent in the future, and the public would be better served if he worked with the probation service to address and understand his behaviour and actions. Pathetic. Utterly pathetic. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Recorder Hedworth, you should be ashamed of yourself. You acknowledge that it's a serious offence. You acknowledge the effect on the victim. And yet you give this thug a tap on the wrist, metaphorically. All he has to do is comply with his parole officer. That's it. They may have some community sentence. But he's basically assaulted a young man who'd done nothing to him, ruined his ambitions, and he gets away with it, essentially. Now, some people might say, oh, but no, Nathan, he hasn't got away with it because he has to, report to his parole officer, he has to abide by restrictions, etc. But he's avoided jail. And this is not someone who acted out of a moment's madness. This is someone who had a violent record. That's what makes my blood boil about it. That alone should have meant it was an automatic custodial sentence. But judges don't seem to take that into account. This is why when people say judges have their hands tied, I point to a case like this. This is a case where the offender had a violent record, and yet the judge isn't looking at that as an aggravating factor. I would say if someone has a criminal record, even if the other offences are not directly connected to the new offence, that should be seen as an aggravating factor because it points to a life of criminality. But our idiotic system says no, each offence should be seen in its own merit. I think that's wrong. I think if someone is routinely in trouble with the law, that should be taken into account. I mean, it's kind of madness that it isn't. And what I find utterly infuriating about this, and I despair quite frankly, is it never seems to change. We could be talking about this 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The late Baroness Newlove, who dedicated her life to trying to help victims of crime, I'm sure she would be feeling let down that this sort of situation continues. I mean, Recorder Hedworth, what's he thinking? He says that he doesn't think the public will be served by jailing this thug because it will make him more violent in future. What? Because he'll be angry about being held to account? I suppose there's a small chance that he could see the error of his ways and reform. I'm not convinced because we've seen so many cases of remorseless thugs who will blame everyone but themselves, so he won't take any personal responsibility. They don't show remorse and they don't change. So where's the deterrent factor? But there's also the point about the victim. His dream's been shattered. I hope he can rebuild his life. I hope he can find something else that he's passionate about. I hope he can regain confidence, but that sort of prolonged assault would affect anyone. And you know what really makes me hopping mad is the sheer detachment the judge seems to have. He acknowledges it's a serious crime. He condemns the offender. He expresses sympathy to the victim, and then he gives a suspended sentence. It's like the two things don't connect. If you're acknowledging it's a serious crime, then impose a penalty that reflects that. So it's just pathetic. I know that area well. I mean, everyone in Sunderland knows that area. It's a public area. I wouldn't say it's particularly rough, but like any town or city centre at night time, you get plenty of idiots around. Um, and this was for nothing. This wasn't like two guys who knew each other and got into a fight, in which case it would be an unfortunate situation. This was just an unprovoked attack on an innocent victim. Um, where's the deterrent? I mean, the most you could say is it's a bit of an inconvenience in the offender's life. He has to report to his parole officer, and if he breaches anything, then he'll be sent to jail. But that's only if that happens. Sentenced to 21 months in jail, suspended for 2 years. That's a contradiction in terms. But I've said this before, unless we have a radical shake up in our justice system regarding sentencing, nothing's going to change. That comes down to legislators, it comes down to the Sentencing Council, and it comes down to judges. The Sentencing Council claim they just offer advice. Bullshit. They could do a lot more than they do. They could start advising tougher sentences. Judges, they claim their hands are tied. They can use their position, speak out, and say, look, give us stronger sentencing guidelines. But again, judges, they have aggravating and mitigating factors. I demand to know why, when you have an offender who has already had a violent record, and then they're up before a judge again, they escape a custodial sentence. It's absolutely infuriating. I mean, I could maybe understand that if it really was a first time offence and it was a moment of sheer madness and the offender really expressed remorse. In this case, he hasn't shown any remorse. He's just got excuses, claims he can't remember it. The report doesn't say anything about him showing any sympathy, posthumous, not posthumous, post sympathy to the victim. It just, when I think about cases like this, it makes me so angry. Our pathetic, pathetic, pathetic justice system. These people don't care. They're just happy in their little bubble. To hell with the public. We're the ones making the decisions. We'll give lip service to the public, but they don't care. Because if they really cared, they would start doing their damn jobs and issuing real sentences. And no, it's not a case of just blind revenge or lock them up and throw away the key. All I'm saying is let's have sentences that actually match the gravity of the crime. That's all. It's hardly unreasonable. It's hardly extreme. I challenge everyone who promotes leniency on crime. What would you say to this young victim? Oh, we're really sorry for you, but by the way, the thug that done it, we agree that he shouldn't go to jail. It makes my blood boil. And I would not at all be surprised if Leon Appleton, um, if he commits another offence. Because soft justice does not work. It just doesn't. Despite what the Liberal left claim to the contrary, it does not work. I'm going to wrap this up because there's not much more to add really. But if if you're hearing anger in my voice, I'll be honest. I am angry. It's what I would call an empathetic anger because I think of how I would feel in that situation if some idiot assaulted me for no reason and ruined my prospects for an ambition I had. I'd be disgusted. I'd be shattered. And these judges just seem so phony because they express sympathy, they condemn the offender, and then they pass sentences which don't match what they've actually said. I think of the other case in Merseyside I read about where a teenager went to a crowded area with a machete. Thankfully, he didn't actually use it, but the judge said he was arrogant and he thought that his age would protect him. And I think, okay, this is a judge that actually is going to use common sense. Nope, suspended sentence. Now, I don't say all judges are incompetent. I don't say all judges are out of touch, but I think too many are. Too many are. It's just not good enough. It fails victims. It creates disillusion to the public. I was reading a letter in the Times earlier that was saying our justice system's the envy of the world. That's a joke. I mean, this was talking about the jury system being scrapped for all except the most serious cases. I am critical of that. I think a jury system is very important. Um, it may be necessary in issues around backlogs and so on, but anyway, the argument that our justice system's the envy of the world. I mean, you do a vox pop on the street, any street, and ask the British public what they think of our justice system. I guarantee it will be overwhelmingly negative. And it is just so infuriating how arrogantly out of touch these people are. No matter how much the public says that's not good enough, they don't listen. They don't listen. I think their logic is, well, we've studied law, they haven't, so to hell with them. We'll pay lip service. But if they're not serving the public, who are they serving? If you're not serving the public, how are you serving justice? I just feel so disgusted by it. And again, to reiterate, I'm not calling for, vengeance. I'm not calling for punitive punishment. I'm just saying, let's have punishments that fit the crime. Proportionate justice. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm asking for. It's hardly unreasonable. Anyway, I'll close this by saying I just hope the young victim can find something he's passionate about and go for it and get success. I hope he can. I hope he can rebuild his life, whatever anxiety, confidence issues he's going through. I hope he could get help with that. I hope the thug finds some way to reform, but I'm not hopeful because there's just so many situations where offenders see leniency and they don't reform. Leniency, we hear about the Liberal left love to talk about how prison doesn't work, but what about community sentencing? Community sentencing clearly doesn't work when you get offenders going out and doing it again. In this case, the offender had a previous conviction for a fray. He avoided prison, so clearly community sentencing hasn't worked in his case. Unbelievable. I mean, when are they going to change? When is the justice system going to start listening to the public and going to stop letting down victims of crime? I'm just disgusted by it. Recorder Hedworth, you're not living in the real world.